Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Michael Morris. Michael, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Bit chilly and wet today, but otherwise all good, thank you.
Excellent. And it's Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how are you doing?
Hi, Nick. Hi, Michael. I'm doing well. It's a Friday, so yeah, no, it's going well.
Yeah, it's all
It's
chilled
actually good
vibes.
to see you again, Herman.
All right.
Likewise, Michael. We've spoken, but we haven't seen each other for a few months.
No, indeed.
No, this is
absolutely.
We are very happy to have you back on the show, Herman. As based on the comments, so are most of the listeners. Okay, let's get into the news of what's going on at the moment. And the first is this piece in the Daily Maverick by Feral Haffajee asking who's really running South Africa. And she goes through examples of how Cyril Ramaphosa seems to be kind of absent in a lot of ways from the political debate. That this view of him as a consensus seeker seems to be very correct, is that he doesn't seem to do anything unless absolutely everyone is on board. And into this leadership vacuum appears to be stepping ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula. She points out that it was Fikile Mbalula who threatened to get rid of Public Enterprise Minister Pravin Gordhan if there are no tangible improvements in the transport utility Transnet. He had a special hatred for Transnet, whereas when he was Transport Minister, he obviously didn't like them, and he kept complaining about Transnet the entire time he was Minister. Even though it's the president who's supposed to get rid of ministers, Fikile Mbalula was out here threatening him, and apparently he was reported to Cyril Ramaphosa by Pravin Gordhan for this disrespect and breaking of the hierarchy. Mbalula also said that the Reserve Bank needed to really watch itself and take account of the cost of living, and it couldn't just keep raising interest rates forever, even though the Reserve Bank is supposed to be independent. And really, he kind of seems to be, in a lot of ways, the public face of the show. If you look at the episodes of the country, if you look at the episodes of the show over the last couple of weeks, you'll find that Fikile Mbalula's name appears in them probably a lot more than Cyril Ramaphosa. He's always out there. He's talking to the media. It was him who talked to the BBC in that long interview recently. So, Herman, let me start with you. What do you make of this supposed rise to prominence of Fikile Mbalula, once thought of as the kind of weirdo head of the ANC Youth League, was a bit funny, but kind of fun for a soundbite. He's increasingly becoming one of the most important politicians in the country.
Yes, no, and I think what this illustrates to me is if someone like Fikile Mbalula, who is truly a lightweight, can have so much power in a party, it really shows how far the ANC has fallen in terms of a very shallow bench. If one tries to think of a generational succession of ANC leaders, you have sort of the Mandela, Oliver Tambo generation that went out very much in the 90s, and that was their great last hurrah. At that time, the young up-and-comers were Zuma, Mbeki, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and Ramaphosa, although Ramaphosa is a bit younger than the others. And then after that, you don't really have much of a generational bench that could take the party into the next generation of leadership. You've got people like Ronald Lamola, who is seen as broadly competent. But that's about it. In the past, when the leadership of the ANC and the cabinet, there was this idea of these were the big beasts. These were leaders of substance, of course, not across the board, but they were people with background, with education, with knowledge of the world, if not education in the formal sense. But now the fact that the ANC has really in its most powerful party political position in terms of pulling the sitting at the steering wheel of the ship even though not being strictly captain of it, is someone like Fikile Mbalula, who can boast of very, very few successes in his time as part of the constitutional governing executive of the country. It just shows you how vacuous Ramaphosa must be if a lightweight like Mbalula can outcompete him for party power, but also on a broader scale, how the ANC went from a party that genuinely attracted some of the best minds in the country for a century to a husk of its former self. If you think about the fact that Sol Plaatje was the first holder of the General Secretary office of the ANC, and you think
that's a big downgrade.
is inheritor of that, of someone of profound intelligence, skill, nuance, and sophistication to Mbalula. There's something truly tragic about how far the ANC has fallen.
Yeah, no, it strangely never occurred to me that Sol Plaatje held the exact same position as Fikile Mbalula. That's a big change. I guess it's a century, but still not great. Michael, what do you make of this? You were struck by some of the comments made in response to this article that Ferial wrote about the sense of power in the ANC.
Yeah, I think before turning to that, sort of pick up on a point that Hermann makes very effectively, and that is the absence of young talent. This is literally what the party has come to, is a figure like Fikile Mbalula, who becomes so important to them. He is the man who goes in the BBC, this kind of great television interview, and he himself is the one who kind of shares it with the people, with the followers. And then he picks on somebody like Pravin Gordhan. I'm not necessarily by no means a fan of Pravin Gordhan, but a solid bloke who has his own mind and ways of doing things, and it's very considered and so on, and a veteran, somebody who's got some kind of reputation in the organization. He's done things, he's got experience, but he can just be lightly rebuked, a bit like a naughty schoolboy, by the leader of the party. And I think that there's very good points that Hermann's brought out there. So we end up, instead of with the solid blokes who are and women who have really risen through the ranks, have absorbed the institutional values and ethos and so on, we now have these politicians who are just going for the gap. And there were just two things, as you say. I was particularly drawn to the end of the piece by Ferial Haffajee in Daily Maverick. It's just before we get there, she writes about Mbalula with his braggadocio and hip shooting style. I suppose shooting from the hip style is what she really means. He risks confusing the rest of the country, which is not au fait with the governing party's particular culture and practices. I suppose that's true. The thing that worries me in a way is that he can seem to be quite impressive, I'm sure, to a lot of people. He might seem to be quite impressive to a lot of people. Somebody who, is not cowed by the BBC saying,
tells it like it is, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And he kind of answers back. But the thing that I did find quite intriguing, and there's a kind of faintly menacing aspect to it, is the very last paragraph of Ferial's piece, where she approaches the ANC spokesperson, Mahlengi Bengu Matsiri, for her view on the two centers of power issue. And it's quite a detailed, probably 10-line, 250-word response. Very assured, very certain, no embarrassment. It's a kind of unembarrassed statement of exactly where the party stands. The party sees no contradiction. The governing party, she says, receives a mandate from the electorate, and its manifesto gives direction. It's very kind of ideological ducks in a row there. It must rightly, therefore, oversee the performance of the government. So to her, there's no question of any kind of embarrassing merging of roles here, state and party. This is really where the party is, in fact, right at the center of it. And she says there's nothing untoward about the Secretary General expressing an opinion, which is quite intriguing. And then the very final line of the piece is that Bengu Matsiri said the ANC is finalizing a performance report on all its employees in government. So, and this having said that the president is nominated by the ANC and all of them, the cabinet, are subject to the ANC. So yeah, it's that faintly menacing aspect to it, and coming from somebody as Hermann describes him, a young guy who's not very impressive. All in all, it shows what this once great party has come to.
Right, how the mighty Ramaphosa has fallen from being sort of center of political life and seen as like the most powerful politician in the country, to now having people question whether he's even running the ANC, which he is the leader of. So Hermann, my question to you, after Ramaphosa goes, and who knows when that will be, is the next contest going to be between Mbalula and Mashatile?
I think it genuinely is at this stage so difficult to say. With the current cloud hanging over Mashatile, with his thugs beating up, people on the streets, so his political capital is currently certainly not a safe investment. The problem, however, is that I foresee for the ANC's future leadership question is who wants to inherit the party at what stage. If you take over the party just after the 2024 elections, where it might lose power, or it might be in government but not in office, but not really in power, do you want to own whatever comes about from the next parliamentary and governmental term, where the party might either be a minority government, a squeaky majority, in other words, it needs party and party parliamentary caucus discipline it is not known for, or it will be in coalition with some of the small fry parties or the EFF. In none of those circumstances or scenarios does the party strike me as something that someone at that point would want to tether their political career to. Because either you will look weak, incompetent, absent, or simply ineffective, even if you do try your best. So to me, it's very much a question of who's brave enough to take over a collapsing party that is based on a patronage culture that the state it seeks to run can no longer afford. Who wants to captain that team? And part of the question is also at what point? It's a bit like Mitch McConnell in the US. We chatted about that, Nick. One of the reasons why McConnell at 81, very, very impressive man throughout his career, but he is obviously too old. Part of why the Republicans can't now say, look, Mitch, you've had a solid run, is he's in a state where the governor is a Democrat. So if McConnell were to vacate his seat before 2026, a Democrat would get into office. So the question of what comes next, under what circumstances is losing Ramaphosa going to be politically beneficial to the ANC? Then you get to the question of who is competent or capable of leading such a difficult organization. And then you get to the question of whether that person, if someone like that exists, would want to lead the party in that state. And
so can I push back?
Might be naive enough and arrogant enough to take that.
Right. So if I may push back slightly on that last point.
No.
If you look at a party like COPE, you'll always find someone willing to take over the leadership helm, regardless of how dire the situation is.
Fair enough, and that's the sort of weird cadenza at the end, and that's why Fikile Mbalula might actually be the future of the ANC.
Indeed,
he has the self-delusion enough that might actually think, yeah, I can legitimately turn around this thing, because I've been delving a bit into the party structures over the last 30 years. My word. There's nothing left, nothing in terms of structures. So I don't know.
Interesting to think about.
Oh, and Nick, a very last thing that I just quickly want to touch on that Michael actually discussed is this party and state question. Is number one, we should understand that the ANC has always quite blatantly considered the ANC superior to the constitution of the republic.
Himself has said so.
Yes, Mbeki governed like that. I don't know if he ever said it. People like Lindiwe Sisulu expressly made that point. Ramaphosa has expressly made that point. So the idea, and that's the real eerie thing from that quote by the spokesperson, is it is a time and tested method, and there is nothing untoward about this. There is. I mean, the Constitution was designed in such a way that the specific, if you wanted to be in the executive, you needed to be in the legislature. So you needed to have a democratic mandate to make the calls about governance in this country. You can have, I think that you can have 2 non-MP ministers in cabinet, according to the Constitution. But the worrying thing is that this blur between ANC and government and party and state manifests in 3 ways. Number one, in this sort of discussion where we see it now from, control of the party means control of the country, who's in control of the party. Number 2 is it creates this opportunity for the ANC to, as it does, claim government projects as ANC projects. Social grants are perceived to be paid by the ANC, not by the South African taxpayer. So it's a very, very beneficial blurring of those lines for political reasons. And then, of course, you get to BEE and preferential procurement, where, again, you encounter this thing that Zuma actually embodied is, of course, we can do business with the state if we're in the government. We're, after all, the government.
So, Hermann, not to stay on this topic because I do want to move on, but a listener does point out that I actually said on a podcast a while ago that the ANC, one of the reasons it's managed to succeed in so many elections is that it has this incredible organizational structure, which has a branch, an active branch in every single ward in the entire country, pretty much. So what do you mean when you say the structures are rotted?
I think it's the question of what do you mean by active? Because they certainly are active. But it is becoming mini fiefdoms of almost a criminal gangsterism, where
right. So the quantity is still there, but the quality has gone way down.
Yes. The ability of the party to mobilize its structures is still relatively impressive by other party standards, but the branches themselves have become, because of the shrinking patronage potential in South Africa, every little bit of power that you can get within the ANC has become such a hotly contested area, because you need that link up to the patronage network if you want to earn an income from your ANC membership. And even the branches where they once were the foot soldiers, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, literally and electorally, of the ANC, they now become mini fiefdoms that are very active, but perhaps not constructive of an overall party with a mission, with a strategy.
Indeed, there's a lot of time spent shooting each other, which was not the case back in the day. All right, let's move on to our next topic. This is about the state of Johannesburg's power entity, City Power. So City Power has been dealing with a lot of outages recently. In fact, I was affected by one that was pretty bad, a couple of days without electricity. And I think most people who live in Joburg either know someone or have themselves experienced multiple days without electricity in the past couple of months. The infrastructure situation is pretty bad, and it's made even worse by some news that's come from City Power, which is that they've recovered 3 bodies in 3 days out of substations around the country, around the city. And this is usually someone who's trying to steal electricity. Sometimes it's like a homeless person or someone who's trying to kind of find shelter, but usually it's someone trying to steal the electrical infrastructure. And while in the midst of doing so, they make a mistake and they get killed. This is a common occurrence in Joburg and is costing the city millions and millions of rands. That's exactly what happened to the outage near me. The mini substation got vandalized. Someone stole pieces out of it, and the thing was old and not in good condition anyway. And so the city had to come and replace the whole thing, which they didn't do a great job of. But I'm not going to go into that too much. Michael, so let me start with you. It's kind of it's really grim when you start picking bodies out of the electrical infrastructure.
And I think it speaks to a number of different things, but one of them is the economics of risk and the economics of crime, that people are, willing to take this risk, presumably because there is a lot of money to be made from selling stolen metal. We know there is. I've spoken before on the show about the city of Cape Town pointing out some years ago that one of the remarkable things about Cape Town is, or the Western Cape as a province that has no mining at all, has a very, very high export of copper. And copper is a big export was then for the city of Cape Town. And it was all stolen copper. So yeah, we're looking at the tragic consequences of lack of consequences for criminals. Increasingly, people sensing that they can get away with just with stealing things, and then the desperation of thinking to themselves, well, it's a big risk, I might get electrocuted and frazzled, but the income is I desperately need it. There's no other source of income, maybe, or it's easier income than I could get by having to hustle around and really battle in an economy that just isn't delivering other opportunities. This is one that it seems relatively easy. I'm prepared to take the risk. I think all these things are combined in this awful this awful phenomenon of dead bodies being found in state infrastructure, and of course it then leads to all the things that you mentioned, the breakdowns and the extra costs and the delays and all the rest of it. Yeah.
And this is all sort of spread across the city, just also to point out, it wasn't in any sort of one area. They found one of the bodies in the Joburg CBD, one was in Randburg, and one was in Lenasia. So quite different areas. Hermann, any thoughts on this issue? It really, this is part of an emerging story in the mainstream, but I think anyone who's been living in Joburg knows this for a while, is that Joburg really is not doing so great as a city right now.
Yes. And part of the problem here is that I think parties like the DA, spectacularly mismanaged since 2016, not necessarily its governmental responsibilities, but its political narrative. Of the idea is, if a different mayor is in office, things will be better. Nick, as a former councillor, you and ward councillor specifically, you will understand that the governance of a city is an immensely complex thing of networks and networks of collaboration, relationships, legal and illegal.
And very specifically on that, there's been some great stuff written on this by former councillor David Potter, who's written about how Johannesburg is essentially run, because these systems have been so atrophied and so badly maintained, these kind of official reporting systems, accountability, that kind of thing, that a lot of Johannesburg is run through WhatsApp groups. Literally, that's how it's done. You have and it's difficult to hold people accountable. It's easy to ignore things, but it's the only way you get access to officials. If you are a city councillor, the first day you get the job, basically, you get put on a whole bunch of WhatsApp groups with city officials, so you then try and basically beg to do their jobs. And it's just not sustainable.
It isn't sustainable at all. And the problem here is, at what level does a dead body in a substation indicate failure? It could be at least 4 or 5 levels: political, metropolitan or municipal administrative, contracting, security, and sort of infrastructure management. And it's not quite clear what the failure of, why was there a dead body? At what level do we put the failure? And I think the very worrying thing for Johannesburg is it is a very much in an all of the above situation. That the failure is so significant that it's not quite clear where to pin it. So you can't start fixing the problem, because locating the source of the problem is is near impossible. But on the point that Michael made earlier, erstwhile colleague of ours, Sheldon Boyson, and I once had a conversation about, what is it that draws young kids, young boys especially, in colored communities to this gangsterism culture. And we spoke about exactly that sort of odds of human choice. No one really takes a decision or engages in an action that they believe will be harmful to their self, definition of value, worth, and success. So if you join a gang with a very real possibility of suffering from gang violence, becoming engaged in incredible criminal activities that put your life, the life of others, life of your families, members in peril, the person who does that made a calculation, consciously or subconsciously, about the fact that what they want in life is more likely to be gotten through an illegal and criminal life than the alternative, which is essentially a value add, economic participation, social responsible route to choose. If you get to a point where I think electrocution is something, and burns and drowning, these are primitive things that you do not need education to understand the horrendous consequences of. If you can get to the point where I can burn to death internally, but that is still better than the life I'm leading, it says a hell of a lot about the tortured psyche of our country.
Oh, very much so. Michael, anything briefly to add?
By one of our listeners die.
Go ahead.
There we go. Yes, I mean, just to reinforce the point, the comment by one of our listeners: die or starve. What's worse? It's hard for middle class people to appreciate that people are really confronting this really fundamental decision making about how to survive, how to get through to the next day, the next week, and have no conception of a future that might be better than the lives they're living today. And I think that is really the difficult thing that we're going to have to reconstruct. Our colleague Terence Corrigan often writes about the very great task of professionalizing the civil service, which is clearly what needs to be done. But in a slightly different way, it's exactly the same kinds of calculations that are going to have to be overcome. People who are sitting there might have access to resources that they could channel into their own bank accounts and so on, or just use for their own purposes, to bring them to a point where they think to themselves, well, it's actually better to simply abide by the rule book and do my job properly, because that's worth doing and it's going to benefit me and benefit the society. I think it's going to take quite a lot of work to get ourselves to that position.
And if I may quickly add something, the recovery of South Africa lies in simply restructuring our social and economic incentives. And that's one of the questions, is which one follows which, chicken or egg, social circumstances or economic circumstances. And ultimately we might philosophize ourselves into a corner as to, what should be fixed first, society or the economy? But the thing is that an economy, you can measure it, it's understandable. You deal with human desires more than the irrationalities of human ambition and self-actualization. So the question is, our social incentives need to be revised. That we should do in the informal way of good citizenship and societal participation. That can't be done from the top. But the economic incentives is the thing that can be quantified to a greater extent. And that is why the economic failures of the government are so tragic. The economy of a society is one of the few levers you can pull to make life better on a sustainable basis. And we're seeing failure there.
Okay, so we're going to talk very briefly about the EFF, who've been acting a little bit weird recently. So we talked yesterday on the show. Oh, there goes my power. We talked yesterday on the show about how the EFF had put out this list of, public reps who hadn't performed adequately by getting enough people to a rally. And yesterday, Julius Malema was having a fancy dinner with sort of top elites, people who are friendly with the EFF. The alleged cigarette smuggler Mazotti was there, as well as the suspended public protector Busisizwe Mkhwebane, as well as Bantu Holomisa from the UDM, which is a bit odd. But anyway, they were all there. And during the talk, Malema said two very weird things. Firstly, he made, and I think it was a joke, but I'm not sure, essentially a threat against Floyd Shivambu, saying, "Don't organize against me or I'll crush you because I'm ruthless." And then also that he went on to say that Mazotti, who he's been criticized as having a relationship with for a long time, had essentially put up all the money to fund the party in the early days and was, in a sense, one of the founders of the EFF. Herman, in like 40 seconds, your thoughts?
Very on a human psychological level. One tells jokes about things that are just outside your character, or either just outside your character, or so ingrained to your character that it is parodical, or so far outside of your character that it is unexpected. Either this is a joke about the fact that he is so intensely ruthless, or he thinks he just might be able, or it is because he is a funny bunny rabbit. And I think, some of those options for a joke are more likely than others. So it is a threat. I do think so. Especially if you go look at Idi Amin interviews, not to compare the two, the one had stature. But Amin had a sense of humor of some, that was sinister. And it says a bit about a person.
Michael, your take.
Yeah, I used the phrase faintly menacing, referring to the ANC. I think this one takes the cake. Yeah, faintly menacing. I would suggest to Floyd Shivambu.
Yeah, I really wonder whether the EFF is about to go some very big internal squabbling just before the next election, which will not be good for them. But we'll have to see, because Malema remains a potent brand in of himself, but there's only so far you can go if your entire organization is plotting behind your back. Anyway, that's all for today. So we will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone, and cheers.